Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
We're joined now by Curtis Cook, a Democrat from Milwaukee who's running to represent the 11th Assembly District. Thanks for joining us, Curtis.
Thanks for having me.
So I noticed I was checking you out on social media, and I noticed that you're a lifelong Milwaukee resident and that you've done some organizing in your life. Could you tell us a little bit about what type of organizing that you've done?
Yeah, I do a little bit of union organizing. What I've done in the past was really working in my workplace. I was a transit security officer for a few years. I believe it was 2 to 3. Can't really tell off the top of my head, but I helped spearhead the organizing of workers in my workplace. I reached out to fellow workers and coworkers, got them pledged to join the union, educated them about what the union would do, what its purpose served, and how it would help us. And then furthermore, working on various campaigns, getting the word out about elected officials that are running, that are for the people, that believe in the interests of us. And then also just recently getting involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, actually hosting a march of my own was actually something that really turned the tides for my organizing work, really being the sole leader for something like that. But yeah, I've been pretty much everywhere with organizing.
All right. Well, one of the issues that the Capitol and lawmakers are going to be facing is a potential budget shortfall. Governor Evers has warned that tax collections could fall by as much as $2 billion this year. What do you think? What would you want to do to address that shortfall? Would you be looking at cutting spending or raising taxes and fees? How would you try to address what could be a pretty large budget gap?
Yeah, personally, I'm not a numbers guy. I don't know a lot of numbers, but I deal in common sense. And so when it comes to dealing with the state budget, it's about what works and what doesn't. We have to do away with what doesn't work and work with what does. Education should always remain a priority. We should focus on spending money on educational resources for every student in the state and what works for that. And then also Medicare. We can see based off of the pandemic that it shined a light directly on the disparities in our communities. Having access to affordable, comprehensive healthcare should be a right. And we just don't act that way in the state as far as legislation. And so I would definitely put more resources into not just the healthcare itself, but also supporting the industry. We see that we need to build capacity when it comes to managing healthcare in this state, and the types of facilities that we have and the resources that our facilities have. When we started on with this pandemic, we didn't know if we'd have the capacity for the people, which of course you can never plan for something that is unexpected. But we do need to go ahead and do the work. Now that we've been through this, we know what can be expected, at least coming again eventually. And we need to be prepared for that. So really investing right into healthcare industries so that we have the resources, that we have the staffing, that we have the education for those staff members is really important. And focusing our budget on those very issues is first and foremost. So, like I said, I'm not a numbers person, but it's logic, it's common sense. Put the money where it needs to go. Further into that, our small businesses need support coming out of this, further than what the federal government has been able to do. And we should be supplementing, we should be supporting. After this, we have to realize that our small businesses are still hurting, especially in this state where 94% of our businesses are small businesses. We have to go ahead and support those businesses.
In terms of another issue that the Capitol, folks at the Capitol are going to be looking at is redistricting. Governor Evers launched his People's Maps Commission to try to draw the district boundaries. Republicans who control the legislature want to be the ones drawing those lines. Who do you think should draw the next sets of maps?
I would leave it to the commission. I've even said this time and time again in conversation about this very topic. We've seen it in Iowa. We've seen it in various states, actually, beyond just Iowa, where they've commissioned nonpartisan individuals that have no partisan connection. They're just civil servants to come out and do the work of redistricting. It should be a fair process. There's no way. It just doesn't make sense to say that it's a fair process when you're politically connected. Even for myself, I can't say that Democrats should be writing this. Can't say Republicans can be writing this. It just doesn't make sense. I'm not going to be impartial. Unfortunately, that's just what it is. And you have to be sure that that type of work is in the right hands. And I definitely go with the commission. I think that that's a good start. Not the only way to do it, but I think that's the best start for now.
Would you support legalizing medical and recreational marijuana if you're elected to the legislature?
Yes, definitely. In my research on that topic, something I've been researching for actually many years, I think that it has many good, positive, outcomes. We could do a lot with the economy legalizing marijuana from a tax purpose. We could look at the ways that we can layer our taxes so that we can increase revenue in the state. Just looking at, the figures from the first year in Colorado, when they first legalized marijuana for medical and recreational use, they seen I think it was a $10 million surplus in their state's budget that went straight to infrastructure, road infrastructure, and education. So we're seeing increases that could definitely boost our state's economy, but in turn create resources right where we need them. And so we would be remiss not to do that. It just proves itself right there. Along with, decriminalization, I think that should be a component to legalization. We cannot keep people locked up in jail for crimes that no longer exist. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, all of that tied together, I think it'd be a great setup.
What do you think could be done by legislators and lawmakers at the Capitol to address racial inequalities and disparities that have been plaguing Wisconsin for decades?
Yeah, I think, and this is something I've said a couple times before as well, I think we just need to do the work of dismantling the racist systems we have in place. With voter suppression, that to me is a racist system. We know exactly who we're targeting here. We know exactly what the purpose is. And it just, those are the types of things we need to attack head on. When we're talking police brutality, we need to attack those things head on. We cannot do the figure-headed legislation that works for the issue today, and then tomorrow we're talking about the same thing, because it doesn't work. I'm a proponent of aggressive measures to create change in our communities. I think we need to have people that reflect our communities at the table where decisions are made. People that look like me, people that live in the places I live, people that work the jobs I work. That is important. We need people that represent those very interests.
Another issue that lawmakers are going to be looking at is property taxes. Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the country, which is why what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes is limited or capped. They can get around those caps by passing referendums. But if you're elected, would you vote to keep the property tax caps in place or eliminate them?
I would have to caution against going above the caps. One thing that I know, and I worked on the campaign for the Yes for NPS referendum. And the one thing that we heard oftentimes about increasing the tax revenue limit was, this is going to be unaffordable for me. Whether or not that may be true, it's a real concern for homeowners, who are already at this time specifically pushed to the edge. Expenses don't get cheaper. Maintaining your own home doesn't get cheaper. And oftentimes you have an entire family to sustain. So we have to think about those things when we're requiring something of families and people that own homes. We should be looking at alternatives, something where it doesn't push people beyond their limits, especially those on fixed incomes. We have to be considerate of that because it could do more damage to the whole purpose behind what we're doing if we're not. If we're looking to increase funding for education or increase funding for whatever the cause may be, we have to be sustainable, look at things that are going to last a while, so we don't have to revisit this every year, every time we're repurposing the budget. I think that we need to look at alternatives, and what that may be should be up for discussion, but we have to start having those conversations.
One of those alternatives that some local officials have proposed is alternative sources of revenues for local governments. For example, allowing them to levy a half-cent local sales tax. Milwaukee city and county officials have been pushing for that. Is that something that you would support to help fund local governments?
Yeah, I would definitely support some legislation like that on the local side. It's not a mandate of all people, which I don't know if it's the rebel in me, but I don't like mandates simply because not everybody's in a position to perform. So creating a sales tax, increasing the sales tax is something I'd be interested in doing. For those that are on fixed incomes that can't afford certain things, it doesn't have to affect them if it doesn't have to. But yet it still brings in revenue to do what we need to do. One thing, I was having a discussion with someone last week and we were discussing shared revenue. Wisconsin has a history specifically with Milwaukee where shared revenue, we don't get our return on investment all the time. And I think that, what that means for us is that, expenses are getting higher, as Department of Public Works does the work necessary to maintain our roads, but that cost is not getting cheaper. Creating opportunities for people to get jobs, the resources that go into that is not getting cheaper. All the things that we do on the local level, they have a cost, and we have to support those interests and those resources necessary to do that. And so therefore, increasing the revenue that comes in through taxes is something that we need to do, but doing it through sales tax, I definitely support.
Wisconsin has also struggled with paying for roads and highways. Governor Evers proposed the gas tax increase. Would you vote in support of raising the gas tax to help pay for highways and roads in Wisconsin?
I'd support that. I would. A lot of people probably wouldn't, but I would, simply because there are some things we just have to do. Like I said, with the taxing of sales tax, things like that, we just have to do it. Unfortunately, but it does. Our roads are in such dire need of maintenance and just redoing that it's hard not to say yes to those things. So I think we're in a predicament where that has to happen.
When it comes to coronavirus, the pandemic has obviously hit a lot of industries hard. It's also hit the healthcare field, even as hospitals are playing a huge role. Would you want to make healthcare and hospitals a greater priority in the next state budget if you're elected?
Yes. Like I said before, putting money directly into our hospital industry is something that I support simply because they need that. Coming out of this, we've seen that they've been pushed to the edge. A lot of the resources they just simply didn't have. And at a whim, they couldn't afford to get it. Mm-hmm. So, supporting those industries coming out of this is something that's definitely necessary to rebuild our hospital industry. I wouldn't say it's been decimated. I wouldn't say it's been at a loss. But I think they've taken an especially hard hit during this time, even down to staffing. We've had a lot of doctors and nurses get sick on a nationwide scale. And so, if anything shows on a nationwide scale, it should be reflective to the state of the work that we need to do to ensure that our state doesn't succumb to many of the nationwide issues that we see. And having capacity, like I said before, building capacity in our hospitals to support the communities that they serve, specifically in the St. Joseph's area, where, we see that our hospitals need the support that they need. That was the hardest hit area in the city of Milwaukee. And having capacity to deal with those things is something that we should invest in. Even while cases are rising, people are going to the hospital with COVID-19 symptoms and being hospitalized. We still have, cancer patients. We still have heart attacks and strokes and the beautiful side of things, childbirth. And these people need a hospital bed as well as all the resources and staffing necessary to treat them. But we need capacity for that. And I think we need to invest directly into hospitals to do that.
Do you think businesses that follow all of the prescribed COVID-19 safety practices and recommendations should be immune from lawsuits?
I think I've done a little research on that topic as it came up on the federal level. And I think limiting the litigation to businesses regarding COVID-19 precautions, I think it comes close to encroaching on workers' rights. As a worker myself, if I were to work if my employer wasn't doing everything necessary to mitigate my exposure to COVID-19, I work in the sidebar. I work in an essential capacity. We deal with people every day. We deal with everybody all the time as an essential worker. And, we didn't slow down because of the pandemic. We had to keep going. We still had to go places. We still had to do our job. And furthermore, if my employer wasn't doing everything necessary to ensure my safety regarding that, and I got sick, I think I would definitely want that as an option to litigate with my employer, to, possibly sue them and hold them accountable to the failings, I'd say, that happened. I think that it's a twofold issue if we enact legislation that allows the limitation of litigation. The employers can then also become laxed on their precautionary measures to keep their workers safe. And then more people get sick. That's something we don't want to explore. That's not a path we want to go down. And then, with today being the day of record high illnesses and reports of new COVID-19 cases in this county, or specifically in Milwaukee, we cannot afford to go back. And so allowing those things to happen is just a threat to that. And we can't do that. So I wouldn't support that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that local governments authorizing public works projects should give preferences to Wisconsin companies when it comes to the bidding process?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear the first.
When local governments authorize public works projects, should the bidding standards and requirements give a preference to Wisconsin companies? Not necessarily that they would pick them, but should that be considered as like a preference point in their favor, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think so. Mm-hmm. I would say it because we want to keep our state businesses here. We want to give preference to those that do business in Wisconsin. Outsourcing our work and our resources to businesses that don't have an invested interest in the state is something that leads to a slippery slope. We want to invest in our state's economy because those dollars come back to the state some way, somehow. So to invest in a business that doesn't do business here necessarily, it just doesn't allow for that type of stimulation of our economy. I think that the economy works as a big cycle. Everything is recycled between money, resources, staff, business, whatever the case may be. That comes back twofold. And we don't want to invest in places where we don't have an interest, where they don't have an invested interest in us. These businesses that do business with the state have an invested interest with us if they're in this state because this is the place they do business. So, yeah, I support that. I definitely support that because of the invested interest.
There's a lot of interest in this seat. What do you think sets you apart from your opponents? You've got a primary that looks like 3 weeks away from today.
Not 3 days.
What makes you the best candidate?
I would definitely say my youth. My youth definitely works in my favor. My ability to see things in a fresher light, see things with and be more creative. I'm a very straight to the point person. If my answers didn't prove that, I like to just get after things. Any topic that we discuss, I may not know the answer to everything, and I'm not afraid to actually say that I don't know everything. And I think before I get further into that, I think we as candidates need to explain that to the people. We cannot know everything. We don't know the answers to everything, but we have to always be willing to find them. We have to always be willing to educate ourselves on topics. But I think that what sets me apart is my youth, my youthfulness. Being a young person, specifically in the city of Milwaukee, that's looking to do great things for my community, looking to set a path forward for others to follow along and do the same thing. I think that that's pivotal to my community. To be quite honest, we don't have many figures that show any type of inspiration to our communities on this level. We, especially as a young person, being that type of inspiration, I think it's influential and deeply impactful for the young people of our community. But also, furthermore, I think that my ability to persevere is something that sets me apart from my other opponents. My campaign happens to be powered by people. We don't have all the money in the world. We may not compare that well to the other candidates, but at the same time, we have the tenacity, we have the motivation, we have the fight to get going, and that's something I'm looking to take to Madison. So.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time for today, but thank you so much for talking with us. I know you're busy with the primary coming up in the near future, so we really appreciate it. Thanks
for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.